The Redemptorist Monastery of Ballarat was constructed in stages between 1891 and 1933 by various architects. It is of regional, architectural and historical significance using rock-faced Barrabool stone. They are classical or Renaissance in inspiration using large gables with a squat tower. The multiple dormer windows lend a medieval or French flavor to the design, an influence common in religious institutions. The ground-level arcade and first floor of Tuscan articulation was designed by Reed Smart and Tappan in 1891 and 1897, and closely reinterpreted by Fritsch and Fritsch in 1933. From 1933, the monastery included training facilities for the priesthood. It was a flourishing house of studies with fond memories for those who lived and studied there. Adjoining the monastery is the church, completed in 1915. Although generally Romanesque, it complements the matching stone facing in front of the monastery in its Tuscan details. The church is notable for the stained glass windows by Hardmans, the patterned marble floor, and the Fuller organ. The monastery grounds inside were separated from the church by a wall containing images of the Stations of the Cross. Inside every Catholic church, you will find the Way of the Cross depicted on the walls, with 14 images of Jesus carrying his cross to Calvary. During the season of Lent, devotions are held lamenting the painful journey of the passion and death of Jesus. This is an annual feature. The Stations of the Cross on the monastery wall were somewhat different from the traditional images. This is a remaining feature associated with the monastery. They were conceived and designed by a student in 1966. His name is David Anthony. He was also the creator of the rock fountain in the foreground of this image. Jesus is condemned. Pilate hands him over to the Jews, who clench their fist and cry out, "His blood be upon us and upon our children." Jesus carries his cross. The first fall. He is on his knees, head bowed. Cross-section of the cross is seen. Jesus and Mary embrace each other on the way to Calvary. Simon helps Jesus to carry his cross. Veronica wipes the face of Jesus with a cloth which leaves the impression of his face. The second fall. The weeping women. Jesus tells them, "Weep not for me, but for yourselves and your children." Jesus falls for the third time. The cross is shaped as it is falling away from Jesus to the ground. Jesus is stripped of his garment. Jesus is nailed to the cross. Jesus is crucified. Jesus is placed in the arms of his mother Mary. Jesus is placed in the tomb with Mary bent over it. The unprecedented 15th station, the resurrection. David with Joe McNamara, one of the students who worked closely with David in the construction and the installation of the stations. The full way of the cross with overgrown vegetation. The frieze of the stations can be seen on the wall segments. There just happened to be 14 segments, with each segment 8 feet from the top to the bottom. Joe McNamara was a fellow student of David in Ballarat. He closely worked with David in the construction and installation of the Stations of the Cross.
Then I contacted Dave in Malaysia about the process that we did years and years ago. It was the initial design of David. The second part of this booklet was how we actually constructed them, how we came up with that. And then, of course, the third phase was in the booklet was taking photos of the stations and showing how we actually put them on the wall, because they went from a design stage to a practical stage, and then we had to put them on the wall. And it was all that. So the whole booklet was, David came up with the design, how we then made that a reality, how we physically did that as well. And then the last part of it, of course, was putting them on the wall.
At the time the stations were being constructed, Father Michael Mason was a student at the monastery, a contemporary of David Anthony.
That orchard area had been completely rubbish before David put the stations there. So it was a transformation of that area into something very special. I've always been an admirer of David's work, all of his work. Really, he did a lot of other things before the stations that I was much more aware of. Everything he did was controversial, I suppose, because it it was different from the way these things had always been represented. And when you're dealing with sacred objects like crucifixes or stations or pictures of saints or anything like that, there are particular sensitivities. People, I think, they want these things to be represented always the way they had been. They fear that in changing the style of representation that something essential will be lost. I think what David's work showed was that through a new style, perhaps a startling, often style, a different side of the sacredness of the object would be revealed. When they looked at one of David's drawings, I remember one which was all triangles. I can't describe it very well, but when they looked at one of David's sculptures or woodcuts or paintings, it enabled them to see the person of Jesus or Mary differently. And that's what I suppose art is supposed to do. I'm very much in favour of David and his work. The sculptures, it was like a race. It looked impossible, really, to get so many stations cast in concrete and eventually up on the wall, but somehow they did it.
Father Pat Cobbett is the former provincial of Australia.
There is a 15th station, the Resurrection, and that's beautifully presented in, as you finish, if you walk along the 14th way of the cross, when we come to the 15th station, it captures a long history of the way of the cross, post-Vatican Council, and the whole importance of the resurrection. It seems that's the biggest one and stands out. I think it's very redemptorist what he's done.
Father Pat Cobbett was the provincial during the time when the Ballarat Monastery closed its doors.
The church at this stage was after the Vatican Council. Seminaries were looked at again, how to run seminaries. The decision was that we're too isolated, be far better to come and join up with other religious orders and have a combined training for priesthood. So that was sort of behind it. It's from the Vatican Council and so we had this huge monastery, virtually empty, and they turned it into a retreat centre for a while. Eventually, the only solution was to sell it. The maintenance on it was extraordinary, and caring for it and having people to run it, and so it was inevitable that we couldn't keep it. And we had a beautiful church there, as you would see, and so it was a very sad moment from the province point of view to say goodbye to Ballarat. It was one of a few monasteries that were closing at the time in the late 90s, and it was a sadness, but the change had been happening gradually for many years, so it wasn't such a shock. But alongside some of the other bigger monasteries, the one at Mayfield, etc., it was a new era. But I've always looked back on the fact that it was a very lively and wonderful community when it was in full force. So there were two feelings. Ballarat closed over a number of years. The early stage was that the farm that was attached to the monastery had been sold off, I think, very early on, probably in the 1980s. The oval that the students used to use as a sports facility was closed as well, and that was sold off, and a nursing home was put on that at the time. As the students moved down, the students moved to Melbourne during the early 1970s. So gradually there were no students there. It continued as a retreat centre for a short time, but for lack of staff, the missioners were no longer doing missions out of there. It was a retreat home. So gradually the essential works of the monastery had closed.
I grew up in Ballarat, so I have unique feelings about the monastery. I wasn't sorry when I heard about formation moving from there to Melbourne. I was there for 7 years as a student, but we were remote from other centres of study from where religious orders were similar to ourselves, were training their students. There was a much greater number of religious order houses of studies in Melbourne. Everybody had their own places, staffed by their own people.
Following the closure of the Ballarat Monastery, the property was later sold.
Well, it was sold to a corporation. They obviously had plans to develop it, but then they ran into difficult times and they had to resell it. So it was twice sold. And actually the church had some kind of protection over it, but if it was resold, then that disappeared too. So the church is now turned into apartments, and it's very sort of sad to see the church gone as well. But it was a magnificent property, but was beyond our ability to find a use for it. But maybe if it was today, we might think differently. But at that time, in the turmoil in the church and all that was happening, everything was changing. The formation was looked at differently. So the whole lot of reasons why it was no longer serving the purpose for which it was built.
The Stations of the Cross have remained largely intact after half a century, although tarnished by weather and suffered some damage.
I was very sad to see the Stations of the Cross, the wall had been cut in the middle, and some of them were very badly in disrepair. Parts of the stations had been destroyed in the development. So I went back and used the same sort of technique to put those parts that were missing together. So once that was done, it was just a matter of putting those two or three little stations together, the missing parts. But apart from that, it went really well. And the cooperation of the people at Ballarat, the residents, was really, really important.
The Residents' Committee took responsibility for the restoration of the stations.
They'd had queries about the stations themselves when they were in disrepair. It was mainly the initiative of the committee at Ballarat. Some of the residents who had been examining them and wanted to know what their future would be. So they got in contact with the Redemptorists, especially the provincial, Father John Hodgson, and Father Paul Bird, the bishop. And it finally ended up that they found myself, who had been involved with David in the actual construction of the stations.
Father Sam Kono is the prefect of students and the vicar of the province of Oceania. Joe McNamara spoke of the restoration process and the help he received.
I got an email from, I think, John Hill. He was the vice provincial of Oceania at the time, and he was wondering whether I would be able to help connect with Joe McNamara regarding the restoration of these icons. Then Joe McNamara and myself, we had lots of conversations, and we finally asked the students to join us to go to Ballarat, and we just joined Joe, and we offer our help whenever he needs, actually. But that's like the first time when we thought of getting involved in this particular project.
After we'd done the cleaning and things like that, and the students helped in that regard, they came up on 2 occasions and they cleaned the stations down, and then they helped to put the protective coating on them. Once that was happening, I was able to then put the small pieces that were missing together. So it took us probably 6 months, the latter part of that year, to put them together.
In the process of the restoration of the Stations of the Cross, Joe McNamara worked closely with the Residents' Committee, especially with Ian Cochran and Peter Rechner. Joe and Peter walk along the restored Stations of the Cross.
I'm here with Peter Rechner and Joe McNamara, who are significant figures in the restoration, the efforts to restore the Stations of the Cross here at the Ballarat Monastery Apartments?
Well, my name is Peter Rechner. I'm a retired teacher, and I bought this apartment in 2016 and moved in here at the end of that year.
Well, my previous experience here was as a student in the 1960s, which I spent up to 1972. I was a student here, and then we moved to Melbourne.
The monastery was sold, I believe, in 1998, and it was developed by a company that bought it, redeveloped into apartments. It took some time, and I think it was from approximately 2002 that the apartments were offered for sale.
As a historian, what is the historical value of the station since they were in a bit of a state of a disrepair? What made you and the committee, how did you all come to think of preserving and restoring it?
And it was in a state of some disrepair. We looked at this for quite a while and thought something needs to be done. Quite a lot of discussion over the years. And it was probably under the leadership of Ian and Dahlia Cochran, who moved in here, that the committee eventually decided to restore the stations. And I was given the role of trying to coordinate this venture, get in touch with people who might have been involved in it and so on. And so then I got in touch with Bishop Bird, I think, who was also a previous student at the monastery in the late 1960s. And he recommended that I get in touch with the provincial father, Hodgson, wasn't it? And I had contact with him, and he was positive, and he recommended a few names, including yours, Joe.
Yes.
So then contact was made, and we took it from there.
But in the meantime, I found that a lot of negotiation had gone through. Peter and the committee had gone through many people in the order, especially John Hodgson, who was a provincial, and that they were trying to get into contact with somebody that had a bit more knowledge of them. And of course, eventually I was contacted through some of my former classmates, and they said, so then I was given Peter's name, and I wrote to him, and that from there on we worked out some meeting times that at least we could discuss what had been and what might be for the future. So it really just started from a meeting like that we sat down, especially with Ian and Dahlia and a few other members of the owners committee, and we decided to put a proposal forward. And then it was up to the residents and the committee to decide, whether they would accept this proposal and go from there. So that was my initial involvement, at least. Yes, I was happy to give my own time in because of my involvement at the beginning and having made them with David.
Well, we're aware of the heritage of the buildings. And I think that the heritage, and particularly the architecture of it, was a main reason for people wanting to live here.
Are the Stations of the Cross considered heritage?
We certainly consider it heritage. The official status has to be confirmed, but it may well be that they will be officially recognised as a heritage. We were all, of course, aware of the iconography, and we were concerned to preserve it as far as possible. We felt it was interesting as an artistic creation that was perhaps unique, reflecting the kind of modernist aesthetics of the 1960s.
The residents could recognise the artistry in, they wouldn't much know what a way of the cross was, but they could see here was beautiful art and it needed to be restored. And in the process of restoring it, they had to go back into its history, and the whole Catholic Christian way of the cross had a new meaning for them.
A dedication ceremony was held on the 28th of October 2023, officiated by Bishop Paul Bird, to commemorate the restoration of the stations and hand them over to the new residents of the Ballarat Monastery. The bishop spoke on the relevance of the Stations of the Cross and their Christian significance. David Anthony and his wife Teresa were invited.
God, your Son, was delivered up to death and raised from the dead in order that we might live a life of holiness. By the favour of your blessing, draw near with mercy to your faithful people, who devoutly recall his way of the cross. Grant that those who follow his footsteps in bearing their cross with patience may come at the last to the vision of Christ in his glory. For he lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, God, forever and ever. Amen.
David was invited to address the group.
Thank you for extending an invitation to me to attend this celebration of the successful restoration of the Stations of the Cross. I am both happy and honored to have the Stations of the Cross recognized, appreciated, and preserved. Joe McNamara was a fellow student of mine here, and we lost contact over the years. He searched for me, traced my whereabouts in Malaysia, and he contacted me. And he told me about Ian Cochran and Peter Rechner, who were keen on restoring and preserving the Stations of the Cross, and his involvement in the whole project. Joe Mac also insisted that I be present here. He even took the initiative to make sure that my wife Teresa and I were to make disciplines. Our son Joel, his wife Evelyn, and our two grandsons, Luke and Liam, are also here today. I am happy to do this.
Currently exploring the grounds.
Joe Max sent me photographs of the Station of the Cross. To my surprise, the stations have remained largely intact over the years. They have remarkably weathered 57 summers and 57 wet winters of Ballarat. Although largely reserved, they inevitably suffered from wear and tear and have gone through the partitions in the wall. And some of them were quite damaged, especially the first station was badly damaged. Joe Mac worked closely with me and other students in constructing and erecting these stations of the cross. Now he has passionately pursued the task of restoration. The first station consists of 28 individual distinct pieces. And Joe Mac and his team managed to reconstruct the broken pieces, reassemble them, and remount them on the wall, which I think was a fantastic effort at restoration.
Ian saw me on the ground one day with a drill. I said, I think I'm just beyond this a bit.
Thank you, Joe. We were about 80 students living in this monastery here at that time, and Father Don Cruz, who used to be the prefect of students, encouraged the arts. This courtyard used to be an apple orchard. In that square over there, in the middle of the square, I built a cascading rock fountain, which is no longer there. But while I was doing that, the 14 segments on this wall caught my attention. So I proposed to depict the 14 stations on the bus. I got permission from my superiors to go ahead with it. And so we started work on this Station of the Cross. These 14 stations of the cross They elaborate on the passion and suffering of Jesus as he carried his cross and walked the way to Calvary, where he was crucified on Good Friday. By the church's calendar, the liturgy of the Holy Week culminates in Easter. So I thought it was proper and appropriate then to create an unprecedented 15th station of the resurrection, which is on the wall over there. None of us were professional engineers or architects or even artisans. We just used our natural skills with no sophisticated power tools. I remember hunting around the hardware stores in Ballarat looking for a proper kind of glue to mount the station, the slab on the wall. I think we found some kind of an epoxy glue, if I'm correct. But whatever it was, they held fast for more than half a century. I was helped by Joe Mack and several other students. Without good help, I would not have been able to accomplish this. And now I congratulate Joe Mack again on his passionate pursuit of the project of restoration of the Station of the Cross with the help of the current Redemptorist students. It has been a marvelous accomplishment indeed. Thanks, and I attribute this effort to the Residence Committee, especially Ian Cochran and Peter Rechner, and for preserving or maintaining the Station Cross. I am glad that I had a part to play in the history of both of them. Thank you very much, David.
This dedication plaque was then unveiled. Significant people at the event include Bishop Paul Bird, Ian Cochran, Peter Rechner, Joe McNamara, Dave Anthony, and Teresa. The old comrades Joe and Dave with wives Meg and Teresa in front of the plaque. There were some reflections on the future of the Stations of the Cross.
People like Peter and Ian and Dahlia and others would keep their interest, etc. And I think with that, they'll last a lot longer. I'm not quite sure how long, but it is because it is their home now, and I think that's important to know. It's not the Redemptorist home any longer; it's their own home, and that's I think that's important that that's respected, in the future.
Yes, well, we'll certainly respect them and preserve them for as long as we can. And with any luck, they'll have another half century of life. And we hope to be able to pass them on to the next generation in a good state of preservation. Yes, we had a very positive atmosphere at the dedication ceremony on the 28th of October with David and Joe present, some older Redemptorist priests, some current students, Bishop Bird and so on, as well as committee members and some of the residents. And this really felt like a reconciliation of past and present, and a promise for the future.
Such a good artistic work those stations are, and I hope that the residents may find some inspirations whenever they come to see it, or at least we are moving towards the sense of a very secular world these days, and to have those icons being put on the wall still in the monastery department is also like such a good thing to preserve them, because it gives some kind of like a spiritual sense around the place too. So what I hope for is that just for people to enjoy the Stations of the Cross, the icons, because they are valuable for us, I believe, and at the same time probably it offers good things spiritually for people. And it's good that David Anthony and others were involved in that. They thought of trying to make it like now, in some senses, just to give us some ideas around the richness of the culture, probably around the iconographic kind of things. Because icons, I believe, they portray something very important to us in a minimal space. So that space, I would say, it's a very minimal space. But when you see the icons on the wall, you can just feel like it's connected to us. Something familiar comes to us and gives us that kind of spiritual sense to live, to go forward. So that's what I can say.
Well, when we had the meeting on the 28th of October of this year, and I think it was almost a memorial service, really, in a sense. I don't mean the death of the stations, but the resurrection of them, because they had been, in the closing of the monastery, there had been no ceremony whatsoever. And I think this, and with the residents, with the Paul Bird, the bishop, with some of the Redemptorists, with the interests of people from the residents, and the small ceremony, it was really like handing over the stations to the new residents of the community. It's their future now. They're the custodians, really. So the Redemptorists, in a way, have handed over something that had been done, and a very spiritual thing. But now the wonderful thing is that I think it's been a real healing of the handover of the Redemptorist community to the modern community. When the stations have been restored, the history of the place will make better sense to them. And from the initiative that they've taken, I think that'll be really good. It's as I said before, it's the custodian is now under them, and it's their home. That really came home to me as I saw it. It comes home because it is their residence, it's their history now, and it's been passed on. And I think to a wonderful group of people. Yes, so I think it's a good future.
The thing is that they find themselves the possessors of an outstanding work of art. I think they probably should understand it as something that nobody can really own. It's just there. It was there before they came. So it's something that belongs to humanity. They mustn't think of it as their little devotional object. It's a work of art and also a representation of the Passion of the Lord, which of course you find in every single Catholic church in various artistic styles. But what's unique about this one is that it is genuinely a major piece of art. I was very surprised that the residents seem to have an appreciation of this. This is very much the way in which they seem to look at it, and I think that's wonderful, and that it bodes well for the future of that project there. It would be nice if they wrote into their constitution or their statutes or whatever they have as a governing body that should the ownership of the project ever pass from them to others, there's something written into that puts, so to speak, a covenant on the stations that ensures that that work is preserved for the long-term future.
So it was an evangelizing moment in this secular building now, to have this Christian symbol, powerful symbol of the Way of the Cross. And the Way of the Cross now ends with the risen Lord. So it's, I think it's a very special evangelizing way in this for the future. So a very significant moment, and that Bishop Paul Bird, a Redemptorist, was there to give it a new history and a new acceptance as a beautiful Christian symbol in this now secular dwelling place here. It was a joy to my heart to actually be there and be part of that dedication, to see them in their pristine state again and recognised as a Christian symbol and a significant piece of work that is worthy of restoration and being able to be viewed as an artwork, but also then as a Christian message of the Lord's passion, especially the risen Lord, symbolised in what is our 15th station.